intended for people like him. Why were there not other purposes to education besides preparing clergy? So very interesting. So then he writes this pamphlet. He would abolish Oxford and Cambridge. Interestingly, both of them abolished, and then in its place, he would try and produce not more priests but more leaders in public life. By the way, Oxford University, by this point, was and ever after known for its allegiance to the crown, that is the royalist cause, and to Catholicism. And Cambridge was known for its allegiance to Parliament and the Reformation, the Reformers. To this day, still that way a little bit. That's got deep roots. The Reformation in England began at the White Horse Inn, which is just outside Cambridge. So rather than Oxford and Cambridge, he would have the government, that is the crown, pay for academies in every town. Every town would have an academy. We don't need these places monopolized by the church. And in his day, the church is still Roman Catholicism, more or less. Let's have it rather that there are academies all over every town in Britain, lodging 130 students and 20 attendants, 7-to-1 ratio. 7 kids to 1 adult. Some of them would be tutors, others would be of other sorts. You would go to these academies at the age of 12. That's pretty old. What grade are you in when you're 12? 6? So at the age of grade 6 or grade 7, depending. Yeah, thereabouts. Interesting. And you would stay for 9 years. You'd leave at 21. 9 years of education, but only beginning at the age of 12. Obviously, they have to be ready before that point. He doesn't speak to that, the preparation necessary. He's not, he doesn't, at least in this treatise, he doesn't speak of what they must have done to prepare to go to that through the rigors of this, but obviously they had to. When they get there, they have dormitories where they are to live godly lives and be taught godly habits, etc. He prescribes a diet, very plain but healthy, moderate, not excessive. Exercise was for an hour and a half before their lunch. 90 minutes of exercise before lunch, unless they got up earlier, in which case they could do it a little earlier, but at any rate, 90 minutes of exercise in school. Then they learned to use the exact use of a weapon, which would be a sword. Milton was a fencer, which would help them become nimble on their feet and strong and balanced. And obviously they'd be fit to defend themselves and their house, their country. It would also teach them to be courageous and to hate cowardice. Greek and Roman ideals. But virtue being taught through martial means. Again, would you expect it of Mr. Milton? No, you would not. Also recommends wrestling, physical combat, strength. And then at any point, just before supper, you could have a surprise military drill called. By the way, they don't have a standing army. But you could be called upon to march or get on a horseback and ride the horse, which is physically tiresome as well, right? So physical strength and physical ability along with mental ability. What education anywhere would emphasize that now? I didn't have that, neither did anyone in this room. But he thought it was important. So after exercise, when you're cooling off, you listen to music. And after dinner, supper, it would help you digest and it would calm the passions and so forth. So good, beautiful music. A regular part of the daily education of every young adult from the age of 12 on upward. So one to harmonize your body, the other to harmonize your spirit. Remember, we talked about music and what it does. creating a harmony within the individual. And then there's the academic studies. Well, you begin with Latin grammar. The authors are very diverse. He doesn't follow the model of, again, avoiding the unchaste authors. Henry VIII's tutor, whose name was Juan Luis Vives, recommends that they avoid the Greeks and Latin authors because they're tillers of poisonous fields. Let's avoid those altogether. Milton says, no, read them, and recommends them in great numbers. And don't worry about the fact that they are teaching lying histories and fables. Augustine doesn't worry about it. Milton doesn't worry about it either. Yes, of course, Homer's gods are demons in disguise. So, if you know they're demons in disguise, they're no threat to you. The fables are still something that you can learn from in the histories. Alongside grammar, he adds arithmetic and geometry, which are part of, so he's the quadrivium. And then, early on, the, quote, easy grounds of religion and the study of Scripture. He's not saying he couldn't have had it before, but he's introducing it right at the early outset of their 9-year education. Most of the names I recognize in the treatise are unknown to us, including me. I don't recognize all of the names by any means, and I haven't even heard of some of them, and I certainly haven't read them. And I don't think anybody else will have either, because nobody reads them anymore. So some of the authors he recommends have fallen into basically the slough of oblivion. But he talks about, very early on, the first books you read are written in very easy Latin, and they're about agriculture. Why? Because the kids who come there, they live in an agrarian society just like Jesus, and these will be things that are familiar to them. They've walked around fields, they've seen orchards, they've seen cows, they've watched how that life is conducted. Let's read literature that is written about that, rather. And with that knowledge, which is gleaned from the reading of literature, then they can become better farmers, because teaching is happening in those books. Later on, he'll talk about meteorology and mineralogy and botany and biology, having done geometry. They go on to trigonometry for the purposes of navigation, should they become a sailor and need to use the stars to chart their way. Same thing if they're on a voyage overseas. You can tell where you are by means of the stars. Also, it can be useful for architecture. So he's training budding architects. A commonwealth needs architects who are educated, so the buildings don't fall down, so that they're beautiful, so they reflect the beauty of God in the architecture of the building, just like this beautiful building here. We don't have to go to a specialist school for that. You have the rudiments of it right there. And then a text in practical medicine. Everyone ought to know the basics of human health. This is for everyone. This is not a specialized field. That's the first 3 years. 3 years after that, then they're introduced to poetry. But the poetry is, again, of a certain sort. It's pastoral poetry. It's poetry about the country life. It's eclogues. It's about shepherds and sheep. So it's, again, all very experiential. It's things that the kids will have experienced in their lives, and now they're reading poetry that's about that. And now, at this age, at the age of about 15, they go out on field trips. They go to hunters, they go to fishermen, they go to shepherds, they go to gardeners, they go to architects, they go to engineers. Very practical on-hands training. Learn and talk to the people who actually practice these things. So it's almost like, today we call it a co-op learning. Very interesting. They've been introduced, as I said early on, to Greek and Hebrew. Now they get another foreign language, probably Italian, because if you've done Latin, Italian you can pick up. It's just like that. It's not that dissimilar. Very easy. This is the age of 15. then only then are they introduced to ethical and moral problems. At that age. Now you're starting to grasp it. Think of what you were like when you were 15. All of the moral conundra that you're wrestling with, the way the world is, the hypocrisy of the world, the challenges of politics, and in our day, the propaganda which is everywhere, which was there in Milton's day. It just wasn't in your house coming through your screen. Right? Printing press is the best means of distributing knowledge quickly, and that's not that quick. It's not instant, and you have some filter for it. Now we don't even have that. But then you get the principles of right conduct. It's not just knowing the right things, it's how to act rightly. At that point, you're ready for dramas, because dramas are acting on stage the precepts that they've learned up to that point. Only then. By the way, Milton himself was a tutor, a private tutor. He did it for a number of years, taught his nephews. Probably disciplined them pretty severely by our standards, which is not saying anything because we have no discipline of that sort. I mean, I've never been birched in my life. It was long gone before I came to school. But Milton probably did it. But his nephews became professional translators. And his daughters, by the way, the education he proposes here is not for, he doesn't mention women, but he educated his own daughters in foreign languages, and they would have read to him in these tongues and so forth. So it's not that he put it aside, but there was no expectation of women that they would do these things. Now that will obviously strike us as odd, but it's in keeping with the age. But the educated aristocrats probably, if they were progressive in any way, and I mean this in a good sense here, would have educated their daughters. So Elizabeth I was a formidable intellect, knowledgeable in multiple languages and with theological acuteness, I would say, as well. Writes good poetry. She's not the only one, but she is the daughter of Henry VIII, who was a Renaissance man himself. As proud of his ability to dance and ride the horse and fight with a sword as he was of his knowledge of different languages. So, but then they go on in the final 3 years to study law, politics, justice. That's what they're going to do. Sorry, that's what they're going to do afterwards, but they need to be prepared for that. Now, final 3 years, 18 to 21, you'll be encouraged by this. Then they go on to theology and church history. Note that Milton isn't interested in teaching that formally until they're of that age, until they've got the rudiments of life. Get a little life experience, understand, then we'll go on to theology. Obviously, it's not that the Christian life was absent. There would have been prayer and chapels all along, and everyone would have been reading devotionals, etc. It's not there was no Christian education, but now it's specifically as an academic area of study like some of you are. And at that same time, then you would be introduced to the things that you read here at Tyndale. You would read epics and histories and orations and tragedies. Only then. Because now you get played out on stage or in epics the grand themes of life that you've been prepared for. So Milton, in just the way he sets it out, is almost the way he operated as a poet. He starts off by writing the lesser genres of literature to prepare himself to write the greater genres. So he writes the epics at the end of his life and the tragedy at the end of his life. The greatest genres of literature come at the very end of his life. And the earlier ones, well, he writes pastoral stuff early on. So he's following his own example in that sense as a poet. And the final year, and after they've, so in the penultimate year, after they've studied logic, rhetoric, and poetics, the final year is writing. They're not writing till then. Now they get to compose. 21. In your 20th year, the whole year is writing. You've learned, now you write.